Maybe we could talk a little bit about what that four-part model of consent looks like so folks have something to kind of visualize here.
So basically, we have this idea that there's many different types of consent, and we're really looking for valid consent. So consent that's really grounded in everyone authentically showing up to the situation and that it feels good and like in agreement in our bodies. And we like the etymology of the word consent, which means to feel together or with feeling. If we think of con as with, and scent like sentiment or sensation, that means feeling. So it's with feeling. So that's sort of the basis that we're thinking of everything with consent from. That consent is more about feelings and sensations rather than rules and logic. But we still have to be able to make sense of it. So we came up with this four-part model of consent to help with that. So we have these different pillars. If we think of it like a building, the foundation of the building would be autonomy. Everybody's fundamental right to choose what is best for themselves, including their mind, their body, their spirit, their information and story, things that are an extension of you. And then the first pillar would be capacity. So capacity is your ability to give and receive a clear-headed yes or no to something. Lots of different things affect our capacity. We should think of capacity as existing on a spectrum from incapacitated to 100% capable. That 100% capable is really rare, kind of only exists in video games where it says like you wake up well rested. We're always at usually some part of reduced capacity, whether it's because we're tired or hungry or our blood sugar is low or we have a headache or, we're distracted or something. And so the more our capacity is reduced, the more the risk of consent going wrong goes up. That's the first pillar. The next pillar would be information and understanding. And so information is, like, do I actually know what I'm consenting to? And then understanding is, do I actually understand? And these are actually two really different things. So it's one thing for you to give me all the information about a situation. And it's another thing for me to also then be able to understand that situation. An example of this that's really useful for a lot of people is like when a doctor is explaining to you the potential side effects of a medication. Even if they tell you all those side effects and their relative risks or the likelihood of them happening, that doesn't necessarily mean you really understand what that then is going to mean for you. So many years ago, I took a medication that had the side effect of dry eye. And my doctor said there was a small chance that the dry eye could be permanent. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like my eyes get dry sometimes. I did not realize that that could mean that like I would need to use eye drops for the rest of my life, like pretty consistently because my eyes get too dry. So there's a big difference in the information and understanding. And then we have agreement and buy-in. So are people actually agreeing to things? And like, do they really actually want to do this thing? And this is not to say that, the only type of valid consent is like enthusiastic, because it's not. There's many things that I fully authentically consent to and I'm not enthusiastic about, like changing my baby's diapers. Like I don't look forward to changing a poopy diaper, but I very, very much consent to doing it because I want to take care of my child.
Mm-hmm.
Or I might consent to going to a movie that like a Marvel movie. I don't love those movies, but I love my friends who love those movies and I like seeing them excited. So I agree to go to the movie. But we think of, the idea that if it's coerced, it's not valid consent. And people really should be agreeing to like, what am I actually saying yes to? In what manner, to what intensity, for how long? And the least risky type of agreement is explicit and verbal. The riskier types are implicit and nonverbal, but they can also still be valid. And then we also think about power. And power is something that affects all of the rest of this. The more power differentials there are between people, the more risk that there is of consent being violated. The more we can do to offset that power differential, the more we can reduce risk, whether that's giving people more time, more information, physically reducing power differentials, things like that. Yeah. Is there anything you'd want to add to this really quick summary, Ash?
We can get into so much depth with each of the pillars. I think the only thing I would add is that we kind of tossed about the idea of adding in other pillars. because there's so much that's like relevant to this, but like specifically with autonomy, because that's the foundational piece. It's why we need to practice consent at all. If I want to do something with another autonomous being, I have to create this feeling of consent between us. And so many people come to us with ideas around autonomy that are interesting. And it's like, that's great. That's not exactly what we're talking about here. And how you were talking about the least risk is something that goes throughout all of this. And like on the other hand, with risk to me is responsibility. As autonomous beings, we only really know what's going on with ourselves. And that's something that can take like a whole lifetime to really truly understand yourself, what it is you want and why it is you behave in certain ways, etc. With other people, we're not expecting you to be a mind reader. All of these pillars of consent that hold up the structure of valid consent, you're trying your best with this process. And we want to normalize that, like, it's pretty normal for consent to like fall down at some points. Really important is how you respond after that. We don't expect you to be mind readers, and we can't teach the right way to practice consent that'll guarantee that you never violate consent ever in your lifetime, because everybody has autonomy. They get to decide how they feel. Your feelings can take a long time to be processed. And if at any point in the future you're like, you know, that didn't actually feel consensual, then that's the reality. And so coming back to autonomy of we're each trying our best. We of course want things. We have to negotiate with others and create this feeling of consent. I think having autonomy means you also have responsibility because you didn't create yourself. Your autonomy didn't come out of nowhere. How you got to this point of having wants and desires and wanting to do things with other people is because somebody has taken care of you your whole life. There's a whole group infrastructure that was created before you were born, why you're able to get food, water, why your waste just magically goes away, healthcare, all of these things. We owe a lot to each other, actually. We have this like built-in responsibility to a community. And so, yeah, I toss around the idea of adding in like this little structure of consent exists in a background of interdependence. It's not just autonomous beings that arise out of nowhere. They each come from communities and have responsibilities to them as well. So how you practice consent is going to look different depending on what culture you're in, and trying to navigate other people's culture is a big part of this as well.